days and pleasant nights, fellow travelers along the path of the beam. I am known in this realm as Jaime and Fuego, and if it please you, join me for some palaver here on Hail to Stephen King, my favorite author, here on The Horror Show. I do this show twice a week, guys, talking all things El Rey, my absolute favorite author, as I've said many times on this program. We are just storming through this coverage of the very first collection of Stephen King shorts, Night Shift. And why are we doing this? Well, this is part 3, so I would hope if you're watching part 3, you've been following along, y'all, but we're doing this because Night Shift is celebrating its 40th anniversary here in February, and so I figured there's 20 stories. How about we do 4 stories for every segment, so that as opposed to doing just one review where I would have to kind of skim and maybe it would be a super bloated video, let's just do some bite-sized stuff. Rawr, rawr. Yes. So, I have already gone through the first 8 stories, with this being the 3rd installment. So, part 1, we went through Jerusalem's Lot, which is so incredible, one of my absolute favorites here in this collection. Also did Graveyard Shift, which is very good. We did Night Surf, which is a prequel to The Stand of sorts, and I'm the Doorway, which is sci-fi awesomeness. That was part 1. Part 2 entailed The Mangler, which was a bad movie. We won't talk about that. The Boogeyman, Gray Matter, woohoo, Gray Matter, love Gray Matter, and then Battleground, one of my least favorites here in this collection. So we are now to stories 9 through 12, y'all, and we are starting out with Trucks, otherwise known as Maximum Overdrive, the film which Stephen King wrote and directed, and we'll get to that at some point. But yeah, Trucks is interesting because premise-wise, the short story doesn't really give you much of an explanation. Actually, it doesn't really give you any explanation. What am I saying? In contrast with the Maximum Overdrive film, Trucks is basically about a group of 6 people who are trapped at a diner, and the diner is besieged by these trucks that have come to life and are just, and we're talking 18-wheelers and pickups and stuff like that, and they are just circling this diner, and so they're essentially trapped. People have already been killed by these things. One of the people in the diner, right at the very beginning of the short, he goes and runs out and gets, run the flip over and, is presumably dead meat and stuff. And so, yeah, it basically just boils down to a counter/chef guy, and you've got a trucker in there, and you've got a young couple, and then you've got the narrator, who, I'm presuming the narrator is who Emilio Estevez became in the Maximum Overdrive film. But, yeah, I gotta say, this story, it doesn't really do much for me. I mean, it's interesting, especially at the end in some of the questions that it asks about, what would happen if technology did revolt and we were at its mercy suddenly, what would we become? Would we become their slaves? And, Nicky, we're forever your slaves! Trucks, we're forever your slaves. Yeah, I mean, it's not a very lengthy story, it's like 15, 16 pages, something like that. And it's essentially just a very condensed snapshot of a lot of the beats that we do see in the Maximum Overdrive film. A lot of people clown on Maximum Overdrive. King himself has gone on to say that it's his worst adaptation. And I think as a director, he's a little bit too hard on himself, seriously, because you know what? Maximum Overdrive is dumb as balls, man. It is stupid. It is a bad movie, but you know what? For me, at least, it's one of those, it's so bad that it's good because it's so bonkers ridiculous. The soundtrack by AC/DC, which was King's favorite band at the time, is badass. It is such a good soundtrack. Who Made Who, and lots of other just little instrumental bits in certain beats. Like when I was watching, because I rewatched Maximum Overdrive, it's on HBO Now currently, so if you guys have that, yeah, you can watch it on there. It's one that I never made the effort to purchase, but upon rewatching it, I actually had fun with this silly movie, man. And King has a cameo at the beginning where the machine, the ATM, is calling him an asshole. This machine's calling me an asshole! He's doing his best North Carolina accent. It's funny, but yeah, the acting is over the top, but in my opinion, deliberately over the top. I don't know if that's how he was directing his people, because King has gone on record to say that when he was making Maximum Overdrive, he was coked out of his mind. This was when King was at the height of his zaniness. If you just go on YouTube, guys, and watch the trailer for Maximum Overdrive where King is addressing the audience and he's like this, and he's like, I'm gonna scare the crap out of you, or something to that effect, and he just looks like a maniac. It looks like he was playing up the impression that people had of him, but I have fun with Maximum Overdrive. What I did watch for the first time right after reading this short was the film Trucks, which was made for the USA Network back in, it was like 97, I want to say, and it's got the hottie who was trying to steal Topper Harley in the second Hot Shots movie, Hot Shots Part Dukes War. It's fantastic. But in all seriousness, there's a couple other familiar faces, like the kid, the Canadian kid who was in Freddy vs. Jason is in there as a younger version, but the difference between Trucks and between Maximum Overdrive is that Trucks goes to the seriousness of the short story and tries to maintain that, and it's pretty much humorless, you know? Maximum Overdrive at least had black comedy, and, you know, it was so goof-tastic that it's actually enjoyable, whereas Trucks, especially in a couple scenes, the one thing about Trucks, whereas Maximum Overdrive was more of like a embellished adaptation, albeit a very violent one. I mean, you see a dead dog with like a toy car in its mouth at one point, and like hair dryers that have like strangled you know, scantily clad you know, in her bra up in her room woman and stuff. And I mean, a kid gets run the hell over by you know, like a street cleaner I don't know, some sort of strange roller device. But in any event, it was all kind of played for cheese and for laughs and stuff like that, whereas when there's gore, and there's two scenes in particular in Trucks, if anyone has seen Trucks, and I bet very few of you have, I did buy it, I rented it for like $2 on Amazon just to compare and contrast, since I'd never done that, and since I'd read the short. They bring in weird UFO stuff and things of that nature, and it plays it very seriously, again, once, you know, like I said, and the two kills in particular, there's one where a med suit, like, you know, one of those, you know, suits if you're going to, if you're trying to keep quarantined and stuff, you know, like, if they're going to clean what is apparently a chemical spill of some sort, one of those things inflates on its own and just picks up an axe and just chops these two dudes up. And, you know, it's said that this is a PG-13 movie. This wasn't PG-13 gore. We're talking axes going into backs and necks and stuff, and like legit blood. And then there's another one where like a radio-controlled little dump truck goes and kills this mailman that is very gory, surprisingly. So I don't know if that's actually PG-13 or not, despite saying on material in the IMDb and so on that it is. But yeah, Trucks takes itself too seriously, and that's why you can't really enjoy the Trucks movie, but it's not absolute trash, you know? So who knows? Long story short, the problem with the movie Maximum Overdrive compared to the short story Trucks is that it exposes just the corniness of the concept in the long form, but I don't know, I like corn, you know, I like popcorn, so I recommend Maximum Overdrive, even if it is, you know, pretty bonkers, whacktastic and stuff. So let's get to, and I also recommend the short story too, that's what we're here to talk about more so than anything else. Let's continue into what I call the Dino de Laurentiis King collection, pretty much because 3 of these 4 stories that we're covering today on Hail to Stephen King were all adapted by his production company. He did our last story, which we'll talk about in a little bit, for Cat's Eye, which is a weird anthology that I wasn't the biggest fan of. But he also did Firestarter, and he did this one that I'm about to talk about from Night Shift, and it's called Sometimes They Come Back. And this is my favorite. It might be, it rivals Jerusalem's Lot as my favorite of the collection. Seriously, it's easily my favorite in this. It's the longest, it's almost a 30-page story, if I recall correctly, without, you know, flipping through the pages once again, but it's essentially about this teacher who has never gotten over the death of his brother at the hands of these vagrants, basically, back in the 50s. And so, or like, I can't remember if it was in the late 50s, and in any event, long story short, he's grown up now, he's a teacher, and he's starting at this new school because of the fact that he had like an episode of sorts at the previous school that he was working at, and his wife is worried about him. Never really talked to her extensively about the nature of his brother's death and like what actually happened and stuff. And so he seems to be kind of getting his groove and stuff. And it's funny how this shares a parallel with, you know, a bit in The Shining, where, you know, Jack Torrance being a teacher, having an incident and stuff like that, and having to go find other work. But just as he's kind of starting to figure things out and be okay, lo and behold, a couple of his students start to die and become replaced by kids that look exactly, with the exception of sometimes hair being a little bit of a different style because it's a different decade and whatnot. But he's essentially positive that these are the kids that killed his brother. And they start showing up in his class as some of his favorite students start disappearing. And he is essentially trying to come to grips with if he's going crazy. Once again, people clarified for me, since I haven't read an extensive amount of Lovecraft, that whole am I going crazy, or is this supernatural stuff that I'm perceiving actually occurring, that's a big trope of his and stuff. And so, I mean, King, even though King says that Matheson is his biggest influence, you see a lot of Lovecraft in his stuff. And so this teacher is essentially just trying to decide and figure out, you know, what the best course of action should be. And the course of action that he ends up taking, without spoiling anything, because as I've said in the 2 previous installments here of the Night Shift coverage, I'm not spoiling these stories for you guys because I want you to read them. I want you to read these along with me, and then you can comment on your thoughts, you know, below, or, you know, tweet me, or, you know, whatever the hell it may be. I love the ending of this story. It is dark, so much darker than the adaptation that they did. And it's funny, the adaptation that sometimes they come back, it ended up being broadcast on TV. It was originally supposed to be condensed and a spot in the Cat's Eye anthology that we're going to talk about a little more extensively here in a little bit. But, you know, it had Tim Matheson, I believe was the name of the actor. It's got Brooke Adams, which is interesting because she was the girlfriend in the Dead Zone, which I just rewatched recently for a podcast with some friends of mine, where we talked all about the Dead Zone movie for its 35th anniversary. And that wasn't the Hail to Stephen King episode. That was actually me guesting on their podcast, because they do a podcast currently which is all about David Cronenberg. And so they're going Cronenberg film by Cronenberg film, and they happen to, you know, call up the Stephen King. They called me a Stephen King expert. I don't like using that word. I like to call myself a Stephen King enthusiast, even if I have read all of these books you see beside you. But the adaptation it's pretty cheese, I must say. Once the kids start showing up, it's actually pretty good. It's funny how they don't really change the greaser appearance. They look exactly like they did, but there's some cool twists here and there. I don't like how they change some aspects of the ending, because the ending to Sometimes They Come Back factors in that phrase so well. Oh my goodness. And, you know, just the means that this teacher goes to actually try to get rid of these kids is so dope and so crazy and stuff. But you know, it's not one of the best King adaptations, so unfortunately, and I rewatched it just the other night after reading the short story, so to have some proper context. But the short Sometimes They Come Back, for me, it's probably in my top 10 King short stories ever, although now that I think about it, I don't know if I put it in my 10 shorts video that I did, but it's rivaled. It's so close because it's damn good. I love it, and maybe I just remembered how much I loved it by rereading it. So Sometimes They Come Back is tremendous. Now, third story, the one that we're about to get to, is actually the earliest story of all of these. Yeah, it's Strawberry Spring, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, it is. And this was actually published in Ubris, I believe it was, and that was the University of Maine, like journal of sorts. I don't know if it was the newspaper per se, or if it was just something associated with students there where they could publish creative writing and stuff like that. King published a bunch of stuff in there, including another story that we're going to get to a little bit later. But this is about, so the phrase Strawberry Spring it's very similar to an Indian summer, where Mother Nature basically tricks you a little bit. So a strawberry spring is where, you know, you're in winter and all of a sudden it warms the hell up. And you're thinking, oh wow, spring is coming early. That groundhog, you know, that Bill Murray was covering, you know, there was something to that. But this Strawberry Spring comes to this fictional campus, you know, fictional characters, fictional campus that King basically, it's funny because it takes place at the college campus. He was in college. It's published in a college journal. So I mean, this all kind of correlates, and it feels like it feels kind of amateurish, but it's not bad. It's got an interesting twist, and there's a killer called Spring-Heeled Jack, which is on the loose because this Strawberry Spring has basically brought with it a lot of fog at night. And so in the fog of night is when this Ripper type character, which hence the name Jack, I'm assuming, he's going out and he's killing girls and stuff. And so yeah, they make some false arrests, and they can't seem to figure out who it is. And so it's interesting because the narrator, he basically is reflecting on this childhood memory of this murder spree because another Strawberry Spring has come, and he sees like the headline in the newspaper about it and jogs his memory, and so that's why he starts telling this tale. And so this story's it's decent. Once again, it feels like a young writer who is figuring out his tone and his style, but it's got that really cool personability, which we see refined in something like Hearts in Atlantis, which is also reflective of King's college experience and stuff like that. And the one thing that I can't wait to read, which I just received recently, is that Hearts in Suspension, which actually has an extensive reflection by King on his campus time, some stuff that he published back then, and some of his friends and contemporaries and whatnot. So that's a book that I'm thinking about doing an entire episode on at some point, or at least to give my thoughts on it. There's an introduction from one of his instructors, and so, but yeah, Strawberry Springs, it's pretty good, It's solid. I must say, Glenn Chadbourne, though, did some amazing illustrations for it in the second Secretary of Dreams. I gotta give Cemetery Dance a shout out with every video, guys, right? Because I want you to give them your money like I've given them tons of, because their stuff is so beautifully produced, and it's worth it. It really, really is. Because you're worth it. As the King fan, guys. So that's Strawberry Spring. It's a simple story, fun twist, and since I can't spoil anything, I'm going to leave it at that because it is the shortest of these stories in the 4 that we're covering today. So now we get to the last one. The last one was published once King had already started to just ascend to his throne, I guess you could say, and show his prominence. It was published in 1976, ironically enough, in Penthouse, of all things. Cavalier was another men's magazine, but this is when he's moving on up in the world and stuff. I think he also published Children of the Corn later in Penthouse. But this is a story called The Ledge, and this was the one that, continuing the Dino de Laurentiis connection, that Italian dude, he produced this as an adaptation for Cat's Eye, which had Drew Barrymore in this framing device anthology with this cat. King wrote the script. I can't say I particularly like that movie very much, to be just brutally honest, which is what I always am here. But the segment is done very well, so let's just, and faithfully adapted too. The Ledge is essentially about a aging tennis player who decides to romance the wife of a mobster, organized crime type guy. Bad idea, dude. Bad idea, bro. And he finds himself in a blackmail predicament of sorts where he's gonna get hit with some heavy shizzle, man, if he doesn't agree to what this dude is basically. They make a wager, not a bet. It's a wager, and so the dude is basically. He says, okay, you've taken my wife. I don't love my wife. I don't care. But, he's almost treating her like property with this tennis player, and the tennis player and her are in love, even though they've already banged a couple times in a cheap hotel and stuff. But they're in love, right? Yeah, exactly. Whatever. And people often mistake love for hormones, guys. Come on now. So who knows what would have happened with that, but the wager is basically he's going to have this, shizzle hit the fan if he doesn't go out on the ledge of this. It's like 40-something stories high, this penthouse of his. Penthouse? Was that intentional? Who knows? But go out on the ledge of this penthouse. It's like 5 inches thick, this ledge, off the rails, and just basically walk around the entire thing. And if he can make it all the way around, he gets this big-ass bag of money, he gets the girl, and dude's gonna leave him alone. But the dude basically, he's giving him this wager because he's positive he's gonna fall to his death. And he says that he's given this wager before to various other sports people, quarterback more famous for commercials than his quarterback rating or whatever, and baseball player, jockey, all these different things. And so he's he's very curious to see what happens with this. And I can't tell you what happens with this. It's actually, it's funny because whereas the first 2 stories we talked about here, Trucks and Sometimes They Come Back, they are of the supernatural variety, or are they? And the last 2, you know, Strawberry Spring and then this one, they're grounded. They're grounded in reality. The Ledge being the most one, you know. It's funny, King does have a fascination with organized crime and things like that. I mean, look at how he injected it into the Dark Tower series, you know, starting with the drawing of the 3. And so it's an interesting story. It's a story that when I first read it years ago, I was just like, man, this is kind of dumb. I don't care about this. But I found more merit in it this time, okay? And, you know, the version in Cat's Eye is pretty faithful, decently done. It's a little on the hammier side, but it really captures the terror of this guy as he is basically battling for his life, walking around this ledge. And so there you have it, guys. I want you to follow along and read these stories with me. Catch up, you know, maybe before the end so you can, you know, continue commenting, or just, you know, comment below as you discover this video and get to it. So I gotta extend, as I always do, a grande gracias to all you peeps, all of you, you know, constant readers, CRs, as we like to call ourselves, you know, for tuning in here and following along with this night shift coverage here on part 3. I have been Jaime and Fuego. You can find me on all social media sectors, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. My Infuegotainment YouTube is relaunching for the Oscars. Yes, so we are talking just about a week or so away. I'm going to be talking about the films that are nominated for Best Picture, giving some reviews. It's going to be fun. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to this video with the hashtag Hail to Stephen King, guys. It is much appreciated. If you haven't subscribed to The Horror Show, please, please do. It is greatly appreciated. Once again, I do these videos every Terrifying Tuesday and every Spooktacular Saturday. So there's tons of cool King content coming in you know, the approaching months. I am currently trying to organize 2 different panels at the Phoenix. Well, it's no longer called the Phoenix Comic-Con. Thanks, San Diego. You're trying to crack down on people. It's now called the Phoenix Comic Fest. I don't like that name, but in any event, I'm organizing 2 Hail to Stephen King panels currently. It might be just 1, but we're trying to nail down 2 with The Horror Show, and it's going to be some anniversary coverage of either The Stand or Pet Sematary, because The Stand is celebrating its 40th this year, Pet Sematary is celebrating its 35th. Later in the year, you can look forward to all kinds of anniversary coverage about both of those books, because they're both in my top 3 for Stephen King ever. Forever, ever, forever, ever. Yeah, forever, ever. They're both amazing. But this is an amazing collection. Once again, I urge all of you to go out, purchase it, you know, or you know, get the audiobook. Like I said, do the Audible, do the audiobooks.com, or do the Scribin, I believe it is, or Scribber, something like that. So I believe it's Scribn, if I'm not mistaken. And it's basically like the Netflix all access of audiobooks. It's pretty dope. I discovered it recently. So there you have it, guys. That is the end of this 3rd installment. Coming up on our 4th one, which is going to be the 26th. Yeah, the 26th of February is when the next installment is going to be coming, because today's the 23rd. Yep, the 26th. And you can look forward to, in that episode, our next 4 stories, which, sorry, I don't know them by heart, guys. I wish I did. The Lawnmower Man, which, mind you, is very different from the movie, but I actually liked the first Lawnmower Man movie, even though nothing to do with the Stephen King story. Then we've got Quitters, Inc., which was also adapted in Cat's Eye. Then we have I Know What You Need, which was, well, we'll talk about it. And then lastly, Children of the Corn, which is not available in audiobook form, ironically enough, because what I've been doing with these is, first I'll read them, and then I'll also listen to the audiobook, because the the Night Shift audiobook stuff, the dude who reads them does a pretty damn good job. So I'll you know, knock a story out in a half hour, and then I'll often, you know, putz around the house doing, you know, dishes or, you know, doing yard work or whatever, and just throw in the headphones. If I'm not banging to metal or, you know, crying my eyes out to soft, sad, acoustic, you know, whiner music, it's usually an audiobook by Stephen King or somebody else spooky. So check that out. Please follow along with me. It's greatly appreciated. And until the Wheel of Ka, as Cecil hates me to say, because Ka's a wheel, right, comes around once again, and we are together again, which I look forward to. I've been Jaime and Fuego. You have been awesome constant viewers, and until next time, remember, stay scared and read Stephen King. Especially sometimes they come back. Holy moly.